Last night, my girlfriend and I decided to catch a movie at this small theater in town. It's one of those old school places that's been around forever, and to be honest, there's not much else to do around here. We just wanted a quiet night out, nothing special. The theater was almost empty, maybe because the movie wasn't all that popular. We got our popcorn, found a spot in the middle row, and settled in. Everything was normal at first, just your average movie date. About halfway through the film, though, I felt something wet hit my shoulder. I assumed it was water, maybe from the AC or a leak in the ceiling. The place is old, so I did not think much about it. I just brushed it off and tried to focus on the movie. But the dripping did not stop. It kept coming down, slow but steady. And after a few minutes, I was starting to get really annoyed. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to see where it was coming from, but it was too dark to make anything out. By this point, my shoulder and arm were damp, and I was fed up. I wiped my arm off with a napkin, but it felt thicker than water. It was sticky. I turned my head toward the exit, and there was an employee standing nearby, just kind of loitering by the door, cleaning something. I'd figured I'd let him know about the issue, so I got up and walked over to him. I told him that something was dripping from the ceiling, and asked if he could get someone to take a look at it. He seemed a little distracted, but nodded and said he'll go talk to the manager. I went back to my seat, hoping the problem would get fixed, but the movie was almost over by then, so I just tried to ignore it. The dripping continued, but at that point I figured there was no point in making a fuss. We could just leave once the credits rolled. When the movie ended, we got up to leave, and that's when we noticed something strange. Outside the theater, there were police cars and ambulance parked out front, lights flashing. It wasn't just one or two. It looked like the whole town's police force was there. People were standing around, looking confused, and some employees were talking to the cops. I walked up to one of the workers, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when they told us. One of their employees had fallen from the balcony up above and hit their head pretty badly. They didn't make it. Apparently, they had been up there working on something during the movie and slipped. I did not put it together at first, but then the employee said something about how the guy's head was busted open, and there had been a lot of blood. My stomach dropped. I glanced back at the theater doors, and it all clicked. The dripping, that sticky feeling. It wasn't water coming from the ceiling. It was his blood. I felt sick, and I couldn't say anything. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't even answer. I just stood there, staring at the movie theater. The idea that we had sat through the movie while someone's blood was literally dripping on me was way too much to handle. We left as fast as we could. I didn't say a word the whole way home. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. The theater's probably going to be shut down for a while, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever go back, even if it reopens. That was, without a doubt, the most horrible experience I've ever had. I can't stop thinking about it, and every time I do, I feel that same sick feeling in my stomach all over again. This happened a while back when one of the newer Star Wars movies had come out. I'm not sure exactly which one, but I remember the theater was packed, which surprised me because I tend to go to the movies alone and usually pick odd times to avoid the crowds. Anyway, I was sitting there, just minding my business, waiting for the previews to end, when I noticed something weird. The guy sitting in the row in front of me, maybe 2 or 3 seats to the left, was turned around, looking directly at me, Not in the casual, over-the-shoulder kind of way either. He had his body twisted in the seat, head leading through the crack between the seat and the headrest, just staring at me. At first I thought maybe he was just stretching or looking for someone behind me, but after a couple of minutes, it became clear that he wasn't doing either of those things. He was just watching me. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he'd realize how weird he was being and stop. But he didn't. Every time I glanced back, his eyes were locked on mine. I thought about moving seats, but the theater was so packed that there really wasn't anywhere else to go. A few people around us started to notice him too. One guy behind me loudly whispered something like, "Hey man, turn around." But the dude did not budge. Another person a few rows down even threw some popcorn in his direction, but he kept staring. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, an usher came over. She asked him to face the screen or leave, and when he didn't respond right away, she had to call for backup. It took 2 staff members to get him to move. Even as they escorted him out to the theater, he did not say a word, and just kept his eyes fixed on me the whole time, like he was in some kind of trance. Once he was gone, things settled down. I tried to focus on the movie, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had crept over me. I kept thinking about that guy and how unsettling the whole thing had been. But by the time the credits rolled, I convinced myself that it was over. He was gone. The staff had handled it, and that was that. Or at least I thought it was. After the movie ended, I hung around in the lobby for a bit, scrolling through my phone while waiting for the crowd to thin out. Once most of the people were gone, I started walking to my car. It was pretty late by then, and the parking lot was nearly empty. As I got closer to my car, I had this weird sensation, like I was being watched again. I looked around and didn't see anyone, so I kept walking. When I reached my car, I saw him. He was standing there, maybe 15 feet away, near one of the light poles, just standing still, staring at me like he had in the theater. My stomach dropped, and my hand started shaking as I fumbled for my car keys. I didn't want to say anything to him, didn't want to make the situation worse, but as I unlocked my car door, he finally spoke. "You look like Princess Leia," he said, almost casually, like we were in the middle of a normal conversation. I didn't respond. I just got to my car, locked the doors, and started the engine as fast as I could. He didn't move, just stood there, still watching me. I sped out of the parking lot, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure he wasn't following me. I never saw him again after that night, but for weeks, I felt like I was constantly being watched by someone. I'd catch glimpses of people out of the corner of my eye, or feel a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was standing too close. I'd look and no one would be there. Maybe it was just paranoia, or maybe something about that guy never really left me. Either way, I haven't been to a movie alone since. This happened a while back when the Harry Potter movies were like the biggest thing. I took my girlfriend Sarah to see a Harry Potter movie one Friday night. It wasn't that packed, which surprised me. I figured it would be, considering the franchise and all that, but there were maybe 20 or 30 people in the theater. We grabbed seats somewhere in the middle, close enough to feel a part of the action, but not so close that your neck starts hurting. And everything was normal at first. You know, the usual previews, people getting settled. I did not really pay much attention to the few people behind us, but then, about 20 minutes in, something felt off. There was this guy, a couple of rows behind us, who kept shifting around in his seat. He'd grunt every now and then, like he was uncomfortable or couldn't sit still. It was just distracting enough to notice, but not quite enough to do anything about it. I figured maybe he had some kind of condition, or maybe he was just one of those people who can't sit still through a movie. But then, out of nowhere, he stands up. And I mean stands up fast, like he's been hit with a jolt of electricity. He stares at the screen for a second, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't make out. Then he bolts down the aisle towards the exit, still mumbling to himself. At this point, everyone's turning to look, and you can feel the awkward tension in the air. I remember whispering to Sarah, asking if she heard what he said, but she did not catch it either. We both shrugged it off, figuring maybe he just needed to leave for some reason. A minute later, he comes back, and this time, he's not muttering, he's yelling. Loud enough that the movie doesn't even matter anymore because now everyone is focused on him. I remember clearly what he said because it was impossible to ignore. "I'm going to kill you all." And I've never been so scared in my life. He wasn't joking, and you could feel it. He wasn't just some drunk guy or someone looking for attention. His eyes were wild, his face was pale, and his voice was shaking but serious. People froze, unsure what to do. Some folks started whispering, and others stood up, ready to make a run for it. Then he runs out of the theater again. A few people followed him out, either scared or trying to figure out what the hell was happening. The rest of us were just sitting there in shock. I could hear Sarah's breathing pick up. I was trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. We were all looking at each other, wondering if we should leave or if someone had already called the cops. About 5 minutes later, we heard sirens. The cops showed up fast, and I could see the blue and red lights flashing through the theater's emergency exit door. They made everyone leave the theater while they searched for the guy. We stood outside, the crowd buzzing with fear and confusion. Some people were crying, and others were just silent. Here's where it gets worse. Turns out, the guy was on some kind of drug, tweaking hard, and after the cops arrested him, they searched his car. He had guns, plural, in his trunk. 2 pistols and a rifle, along with extra ammo. We found out later that he did not bring them into the theater, but they were in his car the whole time. The guy wasn't just talking crazy. He could have followed through on his threat if things had gone just a little differently. The cops took him away, and eventually the theater staff let us back in, offering refunds or free tickets to another show. But I didn't care about that. All I could think about was how close we'd all come to something awful. I remember looking at Sarah and seeing how pale she was, still shaking a little, and realizing I felt the same way. We were lucky. Stupidly, unbelievably lucky. We did not stay for the rest of the movie. We just went home, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about that guy. How random it all was. How easily it could have ended differently. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't ghosts or monsters. It's the real people you pass every day. The ones who seem normal until they don't. This happened a few years ago when I went to the movies late at night by myself. It was one of those old matinee specials that nobody really cared about. The theater was mostly empty, which I expected. There was one other person sitting way up in the front row. I picked a spot a few rows behind him, maybe 6 or 7 back, and settled in. I wasn't there to be social. I just wanted to watch an old film without the usual crowd noise. About halfway through the movie, my phone vibrated. It was an AirDrop notification. I hadn't even realized my AirDrop was on, but I did not think much of it. I assumed it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone from another theater or somewhere nearby. I opened it out of curiosity. It was a picture of me, sitting in my seat in that exact moment. I froze for a second and glanced around the theater. The only person in there was the guy sitting up front, and he hadn't moved. I did not know what to do, but I told myself it was probably a prank. Maybe someone had hacked the iOS system or something. Weird, but not quite dangerous. I forced myself to focus back on the movie. And a few minutes later, I noticed something. The guy in the front row wasn't in the same spot anymore. He'd moved a few rows back, still closer to the screen than me, but definitely closer than before. My heart started racing. Another airdrop popped up on my phone. This time, I was hesitant to open it, but I couldn't help it. I tapped the notification. It was a picture of my car, parked outside in the lot. At this point, I was seriously freaked out. I looked up again, and the guy had moved. He was now just 2 rows in front of me. That was it for me. I grabbed my stuff and bolted for the exit. I did not even look back to see if he was following. I wasn't taking any chances. I ran straight to the concession stand and told the manager what had happened. They seemed concerned, but when security checked the theater, the guy was gone. There was no one in there but me. They pulled up the security footage and showed me that he'd left through a side exit right after I did. They had an employee walk me to my car, and nothing else happened after that. I got in and locked my doors, my hands shaking as I turned on the engine. I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone following me, but there was no one. The next morning, I checked my phone. The airdrop history was gone, like it had never happened. I never found out who that guy was, or why he sent those photos, or how he even got my information. I tried calling the theater later, but they told me there was nothing they could do and that the side exit does not have a camera. And I can't stop thinking about how he knew which car was mine. It still creeps me out, and I've been avoiding the theater ever since. I've changed my phone settings, deleted my airdrop completely, but every time I'm alone somewhere now, I get that same uneasy feeling, like I'm being stalked. Whoever he was gone without a trace, and I'll probably never know what he was planning. But one thing's for sure, I am never going to the movies alone again. So, I used to work at this small movie theater in a relatively quiet part of town. We had regulars, but there was this one guy who started showing up regularly, and he was on a whole other level of crazy. We called him Bike Guy, because he always came in riding this beat-up old bicycle, wobbling like he could barely keep it upright. But that wasn't even the worst part about him. This guy was an absolute nightmare. He would roll into the theater, clearly drunk or high, and somehow always ended up buying a ticket for the weirdest movies. I remember one time he bought a ticket for Trolls, of all things, sat in the middle of the theater, and within 10 minutes, he started shouting at people. Except, there was no one there. Like, not just, oh, he's talking to himself, but full-on screaming at invisible people as if they had just insulted him. Everyone in the theater got freaked out, but before we could even try to get him out, he threw up all over the seats. And after that, he became a regular problem. Every few days he'd come back, sometimes trying to sneak in without a ticket, and every time it was the same routine. He'd get drunk, scream at nothing, or sometimes approach random guests and just start rambling about things that made absolutely no sense. I once heard him talking about how the government implanted microchips in his head, and they were controlling his thoughts through the radio. Another time, he said the moon was following him. He got banned after about the 5th incident. I'm not exactly sure what took management so long, but after that, things were settling down. We'd occasionally see him ride by on his bike, glaring at us through the windows, but he stopped coming in. A few weeks after the ban, I had a late shift. I was closing up and it was already dark. I walked out to the employee parking lot, and the first thing I noticed was his bike, just leaned up against the lamppost next to my car. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen him in a while, but there was no mistaking that old, busted-up bike. Then, out of nowhere, I hear him. He's standing maybe 10 feet away, leaning against a dumpster. His clothes are torn, and he looks more unhinged than ever. He starts shouting at me, calling me sexy in this disgusting, slurred voice. I ignored him and tried to get to my car as quickly as I could, but as I fumbled with my keys, he lunged at me. I don't know how I managed to dodge him, but I did. I threw myself against my car and he hit the ground. For a moment, I thought maybe he was done, but then he scrambled to his feet and started screaming all kinds of nonsense. "They told me about you," he shouted. "I know what you did." I have no idea what he was talking about, but at that point, I was terrified. I got into my car and locked the doors, but he kept pounding on the windows, screaming about how I was marked and they were coming for me. I called the theater's management, who called the police. When they arrived, they managed to calm him down enough to cuff him. He kept spitting and yelling the whole time they dragged him away. I stayed in my car until they were gone, but even then I did not feel safe. That was the last time I saw him in person, but it messed me up for a while. Every time I left work after that, I couldn't help but check the parking lot for his bike. I found out later that he'd been arrested for attacking someone else a few days after my incident, and last I heard, he was still in jail. I'm not gonna lie, I don't miss him at all. Every interaction with him was like something out of a nightmare. The random ramblings, the outbursts, and that night in the parking lot. None of it felt real at the time, but it definitely left a mark. Even now, I sometimes catch myself thinking I see that old bike leaning against something, and I get that same pit in my stomach all over again. Hey, what's up guys, it's Spooky. If you've made it this far, congratulations, you survived. If you did not know, I have an Instagram. Follow me on there so we can connect. I also have a Patreon. On there you'll have direct access to me and can see the upcoming videos, polls, and soon-to-be exclusive stories only shared on there. If that's something that interests you, please consider joining. That's all I have for you guys tonight. Stay spooky and I'll see you in the next video.